So this is where we had left off with our last set of guided examples in our notebooks for our word problems or our practical problems. So we're going to go to the next page, and some of you guys have gotten this glued in class already, and some I may have caught you to give you the tab, but you haven't gotten it glued in. So I'm going to show you where it goes, how we're going to label it, and all that. So this is our second tab for our second unit in our notebook. When we glued in our pink tab, mine, for example, is up at the top of the notebook. So I'm going to stagger this a little bit. I'm going to set it in the middle of my notebook page from top to bottom. My unit after this, my third unit, I will space towards the bottom. So I'm going to go like top, middle, bottom as I glue in my tabs. So I'm going to do this right now, and you can do this with me if it's not already glued in. So some of you might be doing this at home, and some of you might be doing it in class, but wherever you're doing it, you can be putting glue on the back of your divider as I'm putting glue on the back of mine. So remember, we're going to set this from top to bottom. It'll be kind of in the middle of our page. We want to have it so that our name or our title here sticks off the edge of the page. That's the whole point of the divider. I'm going to press down on the front side. I'm going to flip the page over, and I'm going to press down on the back of the page so that this is now staggered from how I had my first tab glued in. And again, my third unit that I do after this will go towards the bottom. So you can kind of see your different topics or your different units a little bit easier. Now that that is glued in, we're going to have 3 different topics that we have within this unit. We're not using all 7 of these like with the last one. We're only going to be using 3 of them. First one is going to be order of operations. And we'll review a few things with order of operations, basically some key things that are easily forgotten or easy mistakes that people make. So there will be a couple different things we put in our notebook for order of operations, but that's our first topic. I'm going to go ahead and have you put the other topics in here now so we don't have to worry about this later. Our second topic will be replacement value, which is what the R and the V actually stand for on our divider tab here. RV stands for replacement value. But we have to review order of operations first to make sure that when we do plug in values for our replacement value, we are following the correct order of operations. And our third topic will be number properties. We will not be using the bottom 4 topics. We're just going to have 3 topics within this unit, so this will be a much shorter unit. I'm going to slide over my notebook now to the page on the right. And we're going to review, we're going to write down our 4 different steps that we have for order of operations. So again, we're going to start by reviewing the order that we need to be solving problems in. So up at the top, I'm going to write order of operations. So you may have heard of PEMDAS before. If you've talked about PEMDAS in other grade levels, we will be talking about GEMDAS this year. I'll write this next to this on the title, but when we think about GEMDAS, we have to be careful. We're not necessarily going left to right the way that this appears up here. We're thinking in terms of 4 different steps. Our first step, and in 7th grade, instead of saying parentheses, we say grouping, and here's why. So I'm going to write grouping. And the reason we say grouping instead of parentheses is because there's all sorts of ways of showing grouping other than just parentheses. Of course, you can have parentheses. That's one way to show grouping. You can have brackets, which are what you would use if you have parentheses within parentheses. The outermost set would turn into brackets. You could have braces, which is the same idea. If you had like 3 sets of parentheses within inside each other, the outermost set would turn into the braces. Absolute value will be treated like parentheses because, and I'm just putting a variable in the middle of those lines. The reason we treat this like parentheses or another form of grouping is because you would have to solve whatever you're taking the absolute value of before you can take the absolute value of it. So absolute value, square root. If you are taking the square root of something and there might be something inside or underneath that radical other than just one number, maybe you have 4 minus 3 under there. You have to do that subtraction first and see what 4 minus 3 is before you can take the square root of it. And finally, if you see different types of fraction bars, which we will talk about in a little bit, and talk specifically about grouping with our fraction bars, either horizontal or like diagonal like that, those would also be different types of grouping. So our first step is grouping, and it's not just parentheses, it could be any of those ways of showing grouping. Now our next step, this is step 2, is exponents. So we've done some with exponents as we've talked about like perfect squares, and then the reverse of that, the inverse of that, which is square roots. We've talked about exponents primarily if it was a 2, if it was a something that was squared, or with our powers of 10 and a little bit with scientific notation, we looked at some exponents. Exponents are your powers that you're talking about. So those would include, I'm just going to include some examples here. So like 4 squared, that's an exponent, right? 2 cubed, that 3 is the exponent. You can have something like 5 to the 7th power. That 7 would be the exponent. So the first thing with order of operations we would do is take care of any grouping, right? Anything that's kind of in any of these symbols, we would solve first. And then we would look at taking care of exponents. So that's the second step. And the third and the fourth step should be familiar with you. You've been probably working on this for years, but sometimes we still get tripped up on this. Multiply and divide. And this is why I like to write my order of operations going down vertically like this. Because multiplication and division are the same step in order of operations. So I go left to right in the problem the way that, in the order they appear left to right. So sometimes I'm going to divide before I multiply. If division comes first in the problem, you need to divide first. They are the same step. Whichever one comes first in the problem, you do first. It's probably the biggest mistake I see sometimes is people get caught up on PEMDAS or GEMDAS and they think you always have to multiply first, and you do not. All right, and then the last one is add and subtract. Same thing as step 3 with multiply and divide. They are the same step. So again, I go from left to right in the problem, the order that they appear. If subtraction comes before addition in our problem, we will subtract first. This is why with a lot of our integer operation word problems, we just went in the order that things were given to us in the problem, left to right when we wrote it out, and sometimes we subtracted first because they're the same step. All right, so now I'm going to flip over my page. And on the back, you are going to glue in the notes page that I gave you for the brackets review. So go ahead and put your glue on the back side of this if it was not already glued in your notebook. Some of you might have gotten it glued in class the other day. Some of you are doing it now. You can follow along and do it as I glue mine in. You can pause the video if you need, or you can let it play if you get it glued in at the same time I do. We're going to do our brackets review first. So like we were saying, there's different ways of showing grouping. One of those is brackets, and those are used if you have multiple, basically, parentheses when inside other parentheses. So we're just going to go through some example problems. I'm going to start by filling in some of these blanks, like the vocabulary up at the top here. So another type of grouping symbol, and fill this in on your page as well. Another type of grouping symbol is brackets. They work the same way as parentheses. Now, when you have brackets, because they're used when you also have parentheses, you always want to start with the inside-most grouping, or innermost, I guess, innermost grouping, meaning the inside out. So you start with the innermost grouping symbol and work your way out. So think inside out. You want to start with the inside and go out. So for these examples, it says you want to start by circling what is the most inside. So you can either circle like this says, and we're talking about the parentheses that are the most inside, or you can highlight. Sometimes I prefer to highlight so that it does, the lines of my circling don't get mixed up with the other numbers and values in the problem. So I'm going to highlight instead of circling. That same idea, you're focusing on your starting point. So for problem number 1, I have these brackets that you see kind of on the outside here. I have parentheses within them. I have some other operations going on as well, but we have to start with basically our inside and work our way out if you have multiple sets, multiple ways of showing grouping, brackets and parentheses, for example. So I'm going to start within the parentheses because that is the innermost grouping as opposed to the brackets, which are on the outside of that. Now, even within our parentheses, there's 2 different operations going on, and we have to figure out which one to do first. We have an exponent, which is one of our steps in our order of operations, and we have addition. So if you remember with our order, we are actually going to start with our exponents first before we worry about the addition. So 2 to the 4th power. So you can use your Desmos calculator for some of this stuff, and I'll actually show you after we get through each problem how you can type the problem in your calculator. But let's do 2 to the 4th power. 2 to the 4th power, if we think about what it means I multiply 2 by itself 4 times. So that would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. In 6th grade, you had to do a lot of this by hand. You can use your calculator for some of this now. So I'm going to open up my Desmos calculator and have this over to the side here. You used to have your Y to the X button on the handheld calculator. It's the A to the B button here on your Desmos calculator. So if I do 2 A to the B, that gives me the exponent. 4, I can hit my enter button, or it will show it to me over to the side before I hit enter. That is equal to 16. So 2 to the 4th power, that is 16 plus 3. When I do this, I cannot get rid of these parentheses yet because I've not finished solving everything within the parentheses. I haven't done the addition part yet. So I'm going to carry everything else down kind of around this. I still have a 9 that's being multiplied, this 9 plus over here, and then this divide by 9. I still have a lot that I'm carrying down each time. All right, so I still have to finish up those parentheses because I still have the addition. So 16 plus 3 would give me 19. Now you can drop the parentheses at this point if you want because I have solved everything in them, but I'm going to keep them to show the multiplication between the 19 and the 9. If you drop the parentheses, you have to show some type of multiplication, whether it is doing that little X for the time symbol or the dot for the time symbol. You have to show multiplication. Otherwise it would look like 919, which is not correct. And I want to make sure to carry down the brackets and everything else around that I haven't already solved. One thing that you can do, I normally draw this little almost looks like a tipped over bracket to show what I'm doing. Sometimes people do like a little V to show what they're doing. You can highlight to show each step along the way, but that helps you kind of keep track of what you've done and what you still need to do. All right, so I have 9 plus, this is 9 times 19. So I'm going to go ahead and do the multiplication because that would come before adding. And I'm finishing off these brackets, what's within the brackets, before I worry about the division that's outside of it. So I'm going to keep working within these brackets. I finished what was in the parentheses. I'm working through the brackets now. So again, you can use your Desmos calculator for this. It's a whole lot easier than 6th grade where you had to work everything out by hand. So if you do 9 times 19, that would give you 171. So 171, and I'm still adding 9 to that. I still have my brackets, and then I'm still dividing by 9. So I have to, again, finish what's in the brackets. So now I'm going to do that addition. So 9 plus 171. And this one you might be able to do in your head, but if you need to use your calculator, 9 plus 171 would give you 180. I don't need the brackets anymore because now I've finished solving everything in them. So I can drop them, and I'm dividing that by 9. So 180. And I believe you have to type this in again with this calculator. There's slight differences between the Desmos calculator and the handheld calculator. With a handheld calculator, you could just kind of hit divide by 9. It would take the 180 and divide it by 9. You have to type it in again in this one. So divide the 180 by 9, and that gives you 20. So my answer here would be 20. So this is called simplifying an expression, when you basically follow the order of operations to see what the whole thing is worth. Now, don't hate me, but I'm going to show you how you can put this entire expression into your calculator. It's taken me a while to get more comfortable with Desmos because we've used the handheld calculator for so long, and both at this point are able to be used on the SOL. I know my students in the past have been a little bit more reluctant to use Desmos because a lot of people like something tangible you can hold in your hand. But you can use Desmos with some of these, and you just know how to type the problem into the calculator. It does so much work for you. So I'm going to type this original problem in, and we're going to check our answer and make sure it's the same as what we ended up getting. Now there's no brackets or braces in the Desmos calculator, so you just end up having to use the parentheses multiple times. So I'm going to start my parentheses. I had 9 plus 9, then I had my parentheses. So this is just doing parentheses within parentheses instead of using brackets and braces. Then I had 2 a to the b to do my exponent to the 4th power plus 3, then I end my parentheses, ended the bracket, which is my second set of parentheses, divide by 9, and if you've noticed, whenever you use division with decimals, it makes it a fraction like this, and there's my answer of 20. It just solved that entire problem for me. Now, you couldn't use this in 6th grade because you didn't have a calculator for your order of operations part of your SOL. But for replacement value, which is what we're getting into once we do a little review of order of operations, you have a calculator. So we got the same answer, just like that. I'm going to go over and do number 2 next. We're only doing 3 sample problems in our notes today for this because they do take a while to solve. Just like in the last problem, I'm going to start by highlighting, you could circle or underline, but I'm going to highlight my starting point, my innermost grouping that I'm going to do. So just like the last problem, I have parentheses and I have brackets. I would start with the innermost grouping of parentheses, or the parentheses as opposed to the brackets. So I'm going to highlight 18 divided by 3. And that's where I'm going to start. I only have one operation going on now, unlike the last one where I had 2 to pick from. So 18 divided by 3 is my starting point, because remember, I always deal with grouping first, and then I worry about parentheses, multiply or divide, add or subtract. So 18 divided by 3, if I know my times tables, that's easy, that's 6. I have minus 5. Now this is still in brackets. I have completed what was in the parentheses, but I have to carry down those brackets. If you don't carry down the brackets, it will affect your answer, because then you'll end up going in a different order. All right, and then I have to carry down the 5 cubed. So again, I've not finished all of my grouping yet. I have to do 6 minus 5 in the brackets, which is, of course, 1. And I carry down the 5 cubed. So again, you can carry down the brackets to show multiplication. You can show multiplication a different way, but you have to show multiplication. All right, so now I'm left with exponents and multiplication. The 1 is being multiplied by that. So I would do my exponents next. I can't multiply by 1 until I know what this number is that I'm multiplying by 1. So 5 cubed. So you can type that in your calculator, but remember it would mean 5 times 5 times 5. If you think about your expanded form, 5 cubed means 5 times 5 times 5. So you can do 5, a to the b button to hit your exponent, and that's 125. And that is being multiplied by 1. So my last step would be to multiply here. 125 times 1 is 125. Just like the last problem, you can go ahead and put this problem into your calculator, but you have to be careful with a couple of things. So we'll type this in together. So I have 5 cubed to start, so that's 5, a to the b, then my 3 for cubed. Now be careful, if I go to start my parentheses now, it looks like my parentheses are actually part of my exponent. So I don't want that. I'm gonna hit the back button. And you want to kind of click off of the exponent. If you don't click off of the exponent, it's going to put those parentheses as part of your exponent and completely change your answer. So click off of it. Then I have the start of the brackets and the start of the parentheses. So I have kind of the inner, or the first 2 starts of my parentheses. Notice it kind of puts the ends, the closing of the parentheses as well. Because it's recognizing at some point you'll have to close the parentheses, but we have to type what's inside them first. So then I have 18 divided by 3. Now Desmos, remember when you do division, it makes it into a fraction. So this is what I'm talking about where you got to be careful. I don't want to just hit minus 5 now, because then it would put that in the denominator, and I don't want it within this first set of parentheses. I have to close my parentheses. And then after I close my parentheses, the first set, I would do minus 5. And it basically tells me, hey, remember you have to close your parentheses, so I'll go ahead and do that. So it looks a little bit different in Desmos, because it makes everything that's division into a fraction to show division. And sometimes you have to click like outside of the exponent or outside of the denominator in order to put the values in the calculator correctly. But you'll see I ended up with 125 the same way. I just had to be careful again about where I was typing and maybe clicking out of the denominator or clicking out of the exponent if necessary. And I'm going to go down to our last problem we're going to do together. So again, you will start by circling or highlighting the innermost grouping. Now, like the first problem, there's multiple operations within that grouping, but we're going to start with highlighting the innermost grouping, which is the parentheses, as opposed to the entire thing with the brackets. So within my innermost grouping, I have two operations. Again, I have an exponent and I have addition. So remember, I would do my exponent before I add. Exponents is step 2, addition and subtraction is step 4. So I go in order of my steps. So I'm going to start here with 5 cubed. We solved this in the last problem. Remember, 5 cubed meant 5 times 5 times 5, or we could put it in our calculator, and that gave us 125. Now, we have to remember to carry down stuff that we haven't used, including any of these parentheses or brackets that you see. So I'm going to kind of go from the inside out to carry stuff down. I still have this 2 that's being multiplied in brackets, and then that 5 plus on the outside. I'm still going from the inside out with my grouping. So I'm going to finish working within the parentheses. So 125 plus 3. Now again, it seems weird I'm adding before I do all this other multiplication, but because it's within the grouping, that's why I have to do it first. So if there's multiple operations in the grouping, you go within the order of doing exponents before addition. But I am adding before I multiply here because it's part of solving what's in the grouping. So this would give me 128. I could drop the parentheses at this point because I've solved everything that's in them, but I will carry them down to show my multiplication. If you want to get rid of the parentheses, you'd have to show multiplication another way, so it doesn't look like 2,128. You have to show that it's being multiplied. I'm not done with the brackets, so I carry that down, and I'm going to carry down what's on the outside of the brackets as well. I'm still not finished with my grouping because I have to finish the brackets here. So 2 times 128. So I can use my calculator if I need. 2 times 128 would give me 256. Now I can drop the brackets. I've solved everything in them. I have the minus 84 and I have the 5 plus over here. So I'm only left with 2 different operations. Now in this case, again, I go from left to right because addition and subtraction are both step 4. In this instance, addition does come first, so I will do the addition first. But keep in mind, if these were flipped the other way and subtraction were listed first, then I would subtract first. I will add because it comes before subtraction in the problem. You will get different answers, so it does make a difference. So I'm going to add 5 plus 256, which would give me 261. Carry down the minus 84, and the last thing I would do is that subtraction. Again, you can use your calculator if you need. 261 minus 84 would give you 177. And to put this in my calculator, I would type in the 5 plus, then I would start, this is the first set of parentheses on the outside would represent my brackets. 2 oops, forgot my other set of parentheses, 2, then I'll start my next set of parentheses that's inside, 5, a to the b, 3 gives me cubed. Now remember, if I just hit the plus sign here, oh, that time it worked. It will sometimes keep things up in the exponent. So you normally need to click out of there. If it doesn't do it, then you're good. If it does, you need to backspace and click out. 3. Okay, then I'm going to end my inside set of parentheses. It's ended my outside set of parentheses, which was good. These were the brackets. I'm going to click out of that and then do minus 84. And I have 177 that I got when I solved that by hand. So as long as you know how to enter the problem into your Desmos calculator, you can actually use that to your advantage. We're reviewing order of operations first, and then we will start putting some values in the place of variables and entering that into our Desmos calculator. But for now, we're starting with reviewing just order of operations and making sure we know how our calculator can help us out.